Hello and welcome to Crime Watch Daily Updates. I'm your host, Anna Garcia. You know, things must really be bad if you call 911 to report a stalker outside and the operator asks you if he's an Akron, Ohio cop. This is the case of a cop who was sworn to protect, but instead he stalked and he threatened several women. Alexis Dekany was a student at the University of Akron in Ohio, studying criminal justice when she met Eric Paull. He was one of her professors and also happened to be a sergeant with the Akron Police Department. The two became friends and eventually formed a romantic relationship. Eric reportedly started becoming controlling and often threatened to kill Alexis. They eventually broke up and she started dating someone new, and Eric didn't like that. She caught him trying to break into her apartment. Another time, he did a background check on her new boyfriend and threatened to kill him. On Thanksgiving Day of 2014, Eric went to Alexis's house and allegedly strangled and sexually assaulted her while her young son was sleeping in a nearby room. She didn't report it to the police because Eric had convinced her that he could get away with it. Months later, Alexis was at a friend's house when Eric tried forcing his way in. Ultimately, Alexis obtained a protection order against him, but he violated it several times. Eric Paull eventually pleaded guilty to aggravated assault, menacing stalking, and other charges. In October 2015, a judge sentenced him to 4 years in prison. In November of 2016, he was granted early release and sentenced to 5 years of probation with GPS monitoring. Let's take a look back at the case of a corrupt cop and the woman who kept fighting against him.
A desperate Ohio couple pleads with a 911 operator.
911, what's going on there?
For police help.
Well, me and my friend, we've been having some issues with somebody stalking us and menacing us.
But the very person threatening their life?
Hey, what's going on right now?
Well, basically, he's armed and dangerous, and he's sitting out in front of the house.
Is the same one sworn to protect them.
What's his name?
I believe it's Eric.
Is her boyfriend the Akron cop?
Yeah. How do you know?
Trust, safety, security. Basic needs that young single mom Alexis Dekany was lacking in her life.
I don't think Miss Dekany had the best childhood and upbringing. I think as a result of some of her experiences, she had a post-traumatic stress disorder and some mental health issues that she was dealing with.
Then, at the age of 27, she decided to take control of her destiny, enrolling at the University of Akron, Ohio, to study, of all things, criminal justice.
During your studies at the university, you met a professor.
I did.
Eric Paull.
Mm-hmm.
Talk to me about him as a person.
He seemed like a very intelligent, great guy, a good teacher. I enjoyed the class.
Someone that you trusted.
Yes.
In addition to being an adjunct professor at the university, he was a decorated police sergeant with 20 years of stellar service.
He was very celebrated. He did a lot of work for the department. They depended on him for grant writing. And from outside looking in, he's what any police department would want.
And after a while, he was what Alexis thought she wanted too. Of course, at the time, he was her professor and a married man. The two became good friends, and some time after Alexis completed his class, they became even more.
Everything just came really naturally. He was helpful with college things, different things I needed or had questions about in school. And I just felt safe at first with him.
He decides that he's going to get a divorce, right?
Right.
He has been with his wife since he was 18 years old.
Correct.
He has 2 daughters. He's leaving his wife. Why? Because he loves you so much?
He said that I was the only woman he'd ever loved. Ever.
And did you believe him?
Yeah, I did.
In Eric, Alexis felt like she'd finally found the safety and stability she'd been craving. But Sergeant Eric Paull was hiding some dark secrets, the kind that escape from the bottom of a bottle.
And how often was he drinking?
daily. Eventually, I realized it was daily. He was a very functional alcoholic. We had text messages between us where he would say, you know, in my career, I'm rock solid. No one knows who I really am.
Before long, the once caring cop started exerting more and more control over his girlfriend's life.
He wanted to know all of my vulnerabilities. He wanted to know everything about my past, everything I was doing every day. He would text me between, I guess the average was 200 and 500 times a day.
200 and 500 times a day?
Yeah.
What else could he have been doing during that time?
And things only got more disturbing from there.
Our relationship was very up and down. It would be really great, and then he would get heavily intoxicated and then would maybe threaten to end my life or his own. I would say almost weekly at one point, he would told me if I tried to leave him, he was gonna kill himself.
Alexis felt trapped, but then, out of nowhere, Eric left her.
I was relieved when he ended it. And
You didn't feel sadness at the time?
maybe a
or-
little, but I think that my gut told me, you know, this is a good thing. This is a good thing.
It had been, what, 2 years?
About a year and a half.
A year and a half
At that point.
A year and a half of extreme dysfunction. Both Alexis and Eric seemed eager to move on. Eric began seeing someone else. And while Alexis wasn't so quick to trust again, she did eventually allow another man in.
September of 2014, I finally, I had met someone through church, and we kind of began casually dating. And, you know,
Did you tell him?
Well, I got up the courage. I texted him when he texted me one day, I said, Eric, it's not appropriate anymore that you message me, I met someone. And he was not happy. About 2 a.m. that night, I wake up to what sounds like someone trying to smash in my bedroom window. It was him. He had ripped the screen out of my bedroom window and was trying to break in.
And that's when most people would have called the police. But Eric Paull was the police.
What happened after that?
He was texting me saying, I will not leave until you come out. I can wait here all night. And so I went outside, and he puts the gun to my head, and
So he put the gun to your head that night?
yes.
Did you think that you were going to die?
Everything inside of Alexis screamed, run away. But mortal fear can be a powerful motivator.
He pointed the gun at himself and said, I can't live without you. You're the only woman I love. I need you. I broke up with my girlfriend today. I want to be with you.
Staring at the barrel of Eric's service weapon, Alexis felt she had no choice but to tell him they could work things out. Anything to get him to leave. But for the bad cop, there was still the matter of the other man she was dating.
The following day, he called me and he said that he had ran the background report on the guy. And he said, I will kill him and I will kill you. You need to stop talking to him. And so I did.
But if she thought that would make things better between her and Eric, she was dead wrong.
Thanksgiving 2014. What happens on that day?
The day started out okay. We went to my family house and he went to his family's house. And
You're still together at this point?
yeah, we're still together. And I get a phone call and he's like, hey, you know, I want to come over and watch a movie or hang out. I said, okay. So I put my son to bed, and when he arrived, I realized he was pretty heavily intoxicated.
Alexis feels uneasy, but doesn't want to do anything to set him off.
After the movie was over, we were laying there, and he just started getting really violent, verbally aggressive, shouting, yelling, to an extreme that I had never seen. And I was immediately very, very afraid.
And she had every reason to be.
He began to get aggressive and yelling and pulling my hair, shoving me, and threw me down on the couch and put his hands around my neck and began to strangle me. I couldn't breathe. I was grasping at my neck, trying to get his hands off, and I couldn't.
And then, with her vision fading, this was the last thing Alexis says she could recall.
He flipped me over and pulled down my pants and just, you know, started raping me. And that's the last thing I remember.
And yet somehow, it was just the beginning. To protect and serve, the sworn oath of every police officer. But when it came to his girlfriend, Alexis, Ohio Police Sergeant Eric Paull operated by a different code. Thanksgiving night, in a heavily intoxicated rage, Eric begins to strangle his girlfriend. The last thing she remembers before passing out, she alleges, is being raped by the man she once trusted.
When I woke up, I was still face down, and my son was at the bottom of the stairs, crying. And Eric was like, got off me and was like, go get your son, bitch.
You don't know at this point exactly what your son saw.
Yep.
But he was definitely there when you woke up.
After that, Eric left, and Alexis felt helpless, too afraid to call police, also known as Eric's employers.
Everything Eric did or said, he showed me that he was untouchable. He knew everyone, people he introduced me to. He would tell me he could kill me and get away with it. But all the time.
And so Alexis didn't file a report. Instead, she takes her own evidence photos and files them away for future use. The next day, Eric and Alexis have the following text exchange. Eric writes, quote, "I've never hurt someone before. I'm actually getting worse." Alexis responds, quote, "You crushed my throat. I felt all the pressure behind my eyes and ears ringing." Eric goes on to apologize for the assault, though he never says anything about the rape.
What happens after that with your relationship with him?
I just try to distance myself as much as possible. I was in that cycle, you know, and I thought I could slowly distance myself and he would leave me alone. Looking back, that was definitely not the case.
Instead, her life became a living hell. Constant texts, messages written in the snow. Eric refused to leave Alexis alone. But then she made a new friend. Just a friend, but a good one.
Talk to me about how you met Alexis.
We had some mutual friends on social media. Kind of just evolved from there.
Like Alexis, Brandon had kids. And for Alexis, it didn't hurt having someone around who could look out for her. But for Eric, Brandon looked like victim number 2.
Talk to me about the first time you met Eric Paull. What was that like?
So my initial contact with Mr. Paull wasn't a very good one.
Akron 911, what's the location of your emergency?
Someone's beating on my door. I don't know if they're trying to break in. They're beating on the window. I've got my young children here.
Was it the night in December when we were at Alexis's house with our children, and he attempted to force his way inside.
His 2 daughters were over. The girls got really scared. They're like, "What's going on, Dad? Like, I don't understand."
They are beating out of the door right now.
Okay, so they're trying to actually get in the house now?
Yes.
I mean, it started getting more fierce and going to different windows and the front door, the back door. I was concerned not only for our safety, but our children's safety.
Do you have any weapons in the house?
No.
Okay. Are they still trying to get in?
Yep.
Okay, go ahead and get the kids upstairs. And go ahead and shut the door once you guys get in the room.
For the next several minutes, Brandon, Alexis, and the kids huddled in the bedroom, waiting for police to arrive, even though in a sick way, they were already there.
We should have an officer. Do you see an officer?
I was upstairs. The police show up and they come inside and Brandon says to them, "I know who it was that's trying to get in." And they said, "Who?" And he said, "Well, it's an Akron Police Sergeant." And he said their whole look on their face changed and they said, "We need to know who." And he said, "Eric Paull." And the sergeant was like, "Oh."
Then, instead of taking a report, Alexis says the officer took out his cell phone to call Eric.
Come to find out, it was a friend of his, ex-partner of his, that was the one that showed up at the residence.
Before they even leave my house, began getting threats from Eric. "I know what you have done."
Alexis tried to get responding officers to take a report, but she says they refused.
I said, he's gonna kill me. Like, he's crazy, he's lost his mind, he's sick, I need your help. He's like, I'm not making a report, I'll handle this. And they drove off.
Abandoned, she felt, by the very agency with any power to do something. And things were only about to get worse.
So Brandon leaves, and Eric calls me and says, if you don't come to my house right now, I'm gonna come and put a bullet in your son's head and kill you too. So I went.
And what happened?
I arrived at his house, and he said that he had taken a bunch of Ativan, and he was holding his gun. He tried to talk to me, you know how much I love you, and just all these controlling, manipulative statements, and I just was appeasing him. I was like, yeah, I'm sorry, you know, I'm terrified.
Can you see it at that point, how bad things were?
Yes, but I was just in survival mode.
You're in survival mode?
At that point, I was still in survival mode.
After that, Alexis says she tried to keep her distance, making it clear she didn't want to see Eric again, but he didn't stay away. And then, April 6th, everything finally came to a head. Concerned for his friend, Brandon told Alexis she could hide out at his house the next town over.
So I went and I hid at my friend Brandon's house and pulled into the garage, turned my phone off. I was worried that there was some sort of tracking device on my phone. And so Brandon said, go ahead and use my phone if you want. I get on my Facebook. And what I found was completely crazy. He said he was going to every guy's house I'd ever dated. He was taking pictures of himself outside of these guys' houses. He can send me pictures of his gun. You know, he's like, if you can come at any time and I'll stop, but I'm not gonna stop if you don't show up.
But Alexis had no intention of leaving the safety of her hideout. Unfortunately, she couldn't stay hidden for long.
Finally, he messages me, he says, I figured it out. You took your dog to your mom's house and you're hiding at Brandon's. You coward.
Gripped by fear, Alexis feels stuck in a merciless nightmare that just won't end.
He's out in front of my house.
And you're sure that your dad is home at that address?
Yes.
It was a nightmare from which she couldn't wake up. Alexis Dekany, brutally raped, she claims, then stalked by the police sergeant she once called her boyfriend. Then, April 6th, Alexis hides out at her friend Brandon's house in a town outside of the sergeant's jurisdiction, just not far enough.
He then sends me a picture of himself outside of Brandon's house, like a selfie. And he says, I can see him in there laying on the couch. I can see him, I'm going in, I'm gonna shoot him.
The person on the couch was actually Brandon's elderly father. Both Alexis and Brandon are out of the house at the time, and Alexis drives straight to the local police department.
I demanded to see the the next person up. They kept telling me no. So finally I called Brandon. I said, call 911. They mandatorily have to send a cruiser to the address if you call 911.
911, what's your emergency?
Well, me and my friend, we've been having some issues with somebody stalking us and menacing us, sending us threatening emails and text messages.
Okay, what's going on right now?
Well, basically, he's armed and dangerous, and he's sitting out in front of the house.
I called 911 from the truck. I didn't know. I just didn't want to go home. You know, what am I going to do? Walk into a gunfight?
A gunfight, right?
You know, or walk into just getting everyone killed.
Is her boyfriend the Akron cop?
Yeah.
Or ex-boyfriend? I apologize.
How do you know?
Okay, she's still here at the police department, so nobody's actually seen this car outside of the house?
I don't know. Right now, I'm going by what she's telling me, and my dad's elderly. He's 65, 67 years old, basically confined to medical equipment. I don't need something going down.
Yeah, for sure. And you're sure that your dad is home at that address?
Yes.
Finally, police do send a cruiser to the scene and find an armed and loaded Eric Paull the next street over.
I literally fell to my knees in relief, and I was like, he'll at least get a DUI.
Something.
She's drunk, he's wasted,
Right.
if nothing else. And they never even did a field sobriety check.
They let him go?
They pink slipped him. A pink slip means that they have him evaluated by a psychiatrist or psychologist. They take him to the psych unit.
And what were the results?
He was out after a few hours. He was messaging me and threatening me from the psych unit. He still had his phone.
Thankfully, Alexis finally gets a judge to issue a temporary protection order, though getting anyone to enforce it may not be so easy.
He pretty much immediately began trying to contact me via email. When I read it and I found it, I immediately called and said, this is what he did. He violated my protection order, and she's like, okay, good to know.
How many times did he violate that protection order? 4 times? What happened on the 4th time that really got everyone's attention?
I texted the detective, I got smart and I said, well, if I have a written document that I am informing her, and I said, this is the 4th time he has violated my protection order, is it irrelevant? Does it not matter?
And what did she say?
Nothing, and then he was arrested that day.
Brought in by his own brothers in blue.
City versus Eric Paull.
Why do you think it was so difficult for Alexis to get the proper attention from law enforcement in this case?
Because it's so hard to believe. We are trained to respect authority, and we do expect our law enforcement officers to be good people. And when an allegation such as this, so outrageous of conduct from an officer, surfaces, it is a very hard pill to understand and swallow.
But it turns out one of the hardest pills to swallow was still to come.
I received a phone call from one of the detectives. I remember she said, I'm gonna need you to sit down for what I'm about to tell you. And she said, there are hundreds of other victims. Hundreds.
While Crime Watch Daily couldn't verify if the number of victims was actually in the hundreds, there is no doubt that Eric Paull did prey on scores of other women.
We really take a deep look into the rabbit hole we call the mind of Eric Paull here, and you find out how demented and sick he was. He had a penchant for adult and female entertainers.
I was informed that he was at a strip club at least 5 times a week, that he was following other women around, that he was harassing them.
He actually went into what's called OLEG, which is a gateway that we have in the state of Ohio. What it enables them to do is find out basic information. And what we found with him is that on dozens and dozens and dozens of times, he was going in using that for his own purpose, nothing to do with law enforcement.
A felony in the state of Ohio.
So we charged him, and he pled guilty to 3 separate counts of misusing what we call OLEG, this gateway, and really abusing the trust that every police officer has.
I'm sure they're upset and embarrassed.
In addition to those charges, Eric Paull pled guilty to 1 count of menacing by stalking and another for violating a protection order against Alexis. But on the most serious allegation, that brutal Thanksgiving Day rape and strangulation,
She never filed any complaints or said anything to anyone about that incident when it originally occurred. I think that ultimately led to that charge being reduced or amended down to an aggravated assault. Mr. Paull has always disputed that there was any kind of a sexual assault, and I would note that there was never any type of sexual assault charges ever filed against Mr. Paull in connection with this case.
The rape was never indicted. So the message that's being sent to her is that it's your fault, somehow, some way, that you were brutally raped.
Though the Ohio Attorney General's office asked for the maximum of 9 years, Eric Paull was sentenced to 4 years on 6 counts, eligible for judicial release in just 6 months. If he's not released, he will serve the entire 4 years. But that's cold comfort to Alexis and her team.
Stalking and menacing could not even begin to express the level of torment I had to experience and endure.
The length of the sentence is certainly inadequate for rape. What we would like to see happen is the department take ownership and accept responsibility and say, hey, we have done wrong by you, and we're now going to protect and serve you and try to rebuild and restore trust in you. That is what we would like to see.
Though we reached out to Akron Police for comment, they have yet to return our calls. However things shake out, Eric Paull will never again be allowed to wear a police badge. But for Alexis Dekany, it's a small trade for the pain she's endured.